All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's get straight into it.
We're going to cover our updates here on the war in Iran. We're at day 31, fifth week of the war. No major developments this weekend, it seems, at least nothing that changes the nature of the conflict, which we all understand now at this point. Now, a lot of people were anticipating that there would be a major ground operation this past weekend. But if you recall, I said last week, more likely it's going to happen next weekend, if it is going to happen at all. And why is that? Well, it has everything to do with the timing of these troop deployments. We at the show, and by we I mean me, we believe that a ground operation will commence once the force posture has been reinforced by the 82nd Airborne, by the Marine Expeditionary Unit, and by a third aircraft carrier. It will technically be only number 2 that is actually in the region, but it will be the third one that's been deployed so far.
Yeah, third aircraft carrier. That's new. I haven't heard about that one. But yeah, I have definitely been predicting a ground operation of sorts happening very imminently. And it looks like, yeah, Carg Island, we're looking like we're going to have some kind of island hopping scenario potentially before they try to take the coastline, something like that. Going to be under constant shot-hit drone fire. I don't know how this is really going to work out.
And we believe that once all of these forces are present, and once the operational planning has been finished, and once the markets close this coming Friday, and Trump's deadline runs out just before April 6th, that is probably the most likely time for a ground operation. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Our big developments on the conflict, first and foremost, like I said, it is what has not happened. A ground operation has not happened and things were relatively quiet. Like I said, it means the conflict is still relatively the same. The dynamics of the conflict, the current state of things is the same as it was on Friday, as the same as it was the week before.
And that's the thing, is like this war, it has a stagnant element to it already. You know, I follow Ukraine pretty closely, and that tends to be a little stagnant, you know, and you get these bouts of excitement. Somebody, you know, breaks through during an assault or something like that, breaks through the trench line, the defenses or whatever, something happens. But this is just already a stalemate. It's like barely anything of note is really happening because Iran is under in a mountain. They're in a desert under a mountain. Can't really do much against that. And America doesn't really want to do a full ground invasion.
And I'll refresh your memory quickly on where things are, and then we'll talk about where things are going. As you know, we've entered the 5th week, so we are now a little bit more than 1 full month into the conflict. Initially, they said it would be 4 days. And Trump, probably persuaded by, was convinced that a decisive all-out attack on Iran would bring down the regime and there would be a quick end to the conflict. The regime change would effectively end everything. And then the United States could accomplish whatever it needed to. If that was a nuclear deal, cutting off funding for proxies, disabling or destroying missiles, that would happen in the aftermath of the regime collapse. As we now know, that did not happen, and Trump did not get his promised quick and decisive action that brought an end to this 47-year conflict. Instead, the war has now become an attritional war that has more to do with economics. The Iranian regime survived. It grows stronger every day. And Iran maintains the capability to bombard the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, as well as the Gulf countries, our allies, and U.S. bases with drones and ballistic missiles.
And how similar what you're seeing out of Iran and the Gulf states, and how similar that is to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where you're seeing major gas and oil refineries in Russia being hit every day practically, missile factories being hit, of course all the strikes that Russia has done on Ukraine, but you see these missile and drone bombardments and targeting critical infrastructure, natural resources, oil refineries, gas facilities, that kind of thing. And that's the meta. That's what we're in these days, is using strategic guided munitions, right, to target critical infrastructure. I mean, That's essentially the meta.
And so now the pressure is going in the other direction. Currently, Iran has all the cards. Our weapons are not working. We cannot achieve the objectives that we set out to achieve with our current tactics and with what we are comfortable with doing. With air and sea power alone, even using all of our weapons, our most precise and advanced weapons, as overwhelming as we can make it, we are not able to topple the regime, not able to suppress all drone and missile fire. There is nothing that we can do. And in the meantime, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is causing oil prices to spike, which is causing inflation across the entire world. And the longer this goes on, the more it threatens to create a global economic crisis. And we're talking a global recession. It's not just the increase in the price of fuel, but it's also the increase in the price of food and potentially a semiconductor shortage because of the lack of helium and other commodities. If this goes on for another month, 2 more months, you're talking about $200 per barrel of oil. You're talking about an economic recession which will have a contagion-like effect. It will spread. The fuel shortages will cause panic. Other shortages will cause price increases.
Yeah, get ready for the run on the banks, like that kind of stuff. Now, I don't think it's going to go that crazy that quickly, but you can see this economic catastrophe get out of hand very quickly simply due to mass hysteria. You already see the public is very prone to mass hysteria. I think we saw it all through the Epstein files, just how crazed people got over literally AI generated stuff, just garbage and nonsense that was just thrown on social media. People whipped into a complete frenzy over fake stuff. And when the real deal economic catastrophe actually hits, and that actually affects your life severely, I think you're going to start to see people really panic, and that's not going to be good.
And this will be a systemic economic crisis for Europe, for the United States, for Asia. And it's not clear that this can even be averted at this point, even if everything returns to normal tomorrow, which is not going to. It's not clear that this can even be avoided anymore. Everybody with knowledge about this situation in government, for example, like in the Italian government, South Korean or Japanese government, and major leaders in the oil and gas industry, they all say it's far worse than anybody even realizes. The economic pain is already baked in and cannot be averted. It's just a question now of how bad it's going to be, depending upon how long it goes on. So we are stuck. Iran has all the cards. They actually have escalation dominance. We have no way to achieve our objectives. And now Trump is effectively trapped. This administration is looking for a way out. We cannot escalate to win, short of a ground invasion or using a nuclear weapon. And we cannot withdraw and finish the conflict on our terms.
Yeah, and much like people have debated over and over again, Russia using nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear bombs or weapons in Ukraine to perhaps have a breakthrough in the lines, something like that, destroy something very strategic. They're not going to do that because it sets precedent. It means that other nations could start using nuclear weapons on the battlefield regularly, and there wouldn't really be large political consequences because you broke that taboo, right? So the United States doesn't want to be the country that breaks that taboo because all these other nuclear armed countries are going to go, well, hey, we can use them too, right?
Of course, we could simply stop bombing Iran. We could sue for peace. If we do, we will have to accept Iran's terms for ending the conflict. Because at this point, we are at their mercy. Whether they choose to stop bombing the Strait, whether they choose to stop bombing the Gulf, is really their decision. And so although one way that we can alleviate the economic pressure, one way that we can exit the conflict is to simply sue for peace and seek a truce, we have to do it on their terms. Not only can we not impose the terms, but we will actually have to give up some pretty significant concessions to Iran. And this, by itself, would constitute a strategic defeat for the U.S. And that, by itself, would also be striking because you consider that we threw everything in our arsenal at this country. Tomahawk missiles and F-35s and 13,000 airstrikes and decapitation strikes. Everything that we have in our arsenal, aircraft carriers and our own drones that we copied from Iran and attack helicopters, everything that we had. And not only did we not win, but we effectively lost. Iran is arguably in a stronger position than they were before. They will have expanded their control over the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, in a way you could say Iran gained territory if they gain literally more territorial waters in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. This is another reason why this method of warfare, this way of waging war, where you're like, well, I'm just going to do naval and air bombardments, and I'm not going to risk any of my own troops whatsoever on the ground because of politics, essentially, because that'd be too politically costly if infantry and armored, troops come back in body bags, or crippled or whatever. They want to avoid that, but it's also like, that's also how you win wars. Like, let's be real. You put boots on the ground because you actually want to win. All right. You actually want to finish the job. You want to kill the enemy, close with them, destroy them. That's what you do. Right. But the fact that, it's this idea that we can just wage war from the sea, from the air forever and never put boots on the ground. It's like, well, no, you're waging war. And war is, at the end of the day, it's two guys on in a field trying to kill each other, really.
The regime will come out fortified rather than weakened. That also carries a pretty significant consequence against the United States because it hurts our credibility and it hurts deterrence, which is what we use to effectively control the entire world. So there's this cascading sequence of consequences for ending the peace on their terms. One, if we leave, we got to give a lot of stuff up. Two, that means we lose. If we lose, that means nobody takes us seriously. So for us to end the conflict on Iran's terms, to de-escalate and end the conflict, this is an unacceptable humiliation for the United States. And it's not like some people think that it's just about being the bigger man, that it's just about calling the quits. It's about cutting your losses. You have to understand this is a catastrophic defeat which tangibly hurts the United States. So we are effectively caught in a bear trap. Trump tried to kill Iran. He failed. And now what Iran is doing is they are trying to impose the maximum cost on not only the United States, but everybody else in the region and also in the entire world.
And they also time it strategically, too, where Trump comes out and he says, we've toppled the regime. There's a new regime in Iran. We've done regime change. And then Iran comes out and they're like, yeah, we just launched Operation 70, true promise of ballistic missiles and drones. It's like the same command structure. It's like, no, you can't just go out and proclaim victory over and over again. Trump is looking more pathetic every day.
And the reason they are doing this is so that they can reestablish deterrence. Iran wants this to go on for a pretty long time, not forever and not indefinitely, but Iran wants this to hurt, and for it to hurt, it needs to go on for longer than we're comfortable with, and they need to make it hurt badly. Badly for the regional players that assisted the United States, badly for the United States, which has done the bulk of the fighting, and also badly for all the other regions of the world that will be affected by the price increases. And the reason they're doing that, naturally, is so that the United States and every other country will avoid ever attacking Iran again. And so we are stuck by design. We were drawn into a trap by Iran and by, interestingly enough, so that there is no escape hatch. There's no exit plan for the United States, and that's a feature. So that is the state of the conflict. That doesn't mean that Trump is not seeking a way out. As I said, Trump and the military planners are trying to get creative. They're looking for a way that we can leverage Iran just enough that we can get out of this. And how do you change this equation? Well, so far, our attacks and our weapons are not able to achieve the objectives that we set out to accomplish in the war. And so we have effectively had to admit defeat, that we are not going to topple Iran's regime, that we're not going to be able to destroy all of their missile launch platforms. We may not even be able to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, if the Strait of Hormuz doesn't get reopened, it's still a complete catastrophe. You may have avoided a massive, prolonged war in the Middle East, which is good. You know, we want to stay out of 20-year-long wars. Obviously, that's the biggest concern here. But if you lose that Strait of Hormuz, man, it is over, and Iran controls that. They will be so beyond wealthy. Completely, like, they will have a fortune to build a grand army, and you will never be able to touch them.
So what the administration is doing is they're finessing our stated objectives, and they're looking for a cheap and easy win, or maybe a risky win, maybe a gamble. But they're looking for a smaller win. They're looking for a win on the battlefield. And they're looking to increase their leverage ever so slightly, not so that we could claim total victory, not so that we can run the table and get everything we set out to get, but so that we don't have to accept such a humiliating defeat so obviously on Iran's terms. So Trump is looking for something he can do to up the ante so that, one, we could say, well, we won this battle, now we're ending the conflict on our terms. And that has a purely rhetorical significance. But also, from a tactical point of view, trying to gain a little bit of leverage over Iran so that in reality, in a tangible way, we actually don't have to accept all of Iran's terms. And clearly, Iran is going to win on a lot of them. The regime remains intact. They're not giving up their highly enriched uranium. They maintain their missile program. And they might even keep the Strait of Hormuz. But maybe we'll be able to get a little something, just a little something to show for it. And how is Trump seeking to do that? Well, it's very clear that he is looking to escalate the conflict into an energy war, and Trump is looking to attack civilian infrastructure in Iran, which will damage their economy. Either he is going to destroy the infrastructure, or he is going to seize control over it with an invasion, or to seize control of Iranian territory. And this will force Iran's hand either by making them negotiate for control over their energy, or by depriving them of control of the Strait of Hormuz. And doing one or both of those things will allow the United States to say, we got a victory on the battlefield and now we're done, and also prevent Iran from wielding all the cards and dictating the terms to the technologically superior United States.
It seems like the big problem with that is if you think that, well, their missile factories and their drone factories underground rely on electricity, then we need to cut the energy off. But you think that this oil-rich nation hasn't stored a bunch of oil, like a bunch of energy, like that they can just use to power their factories and stuff like that? Of course they have. Right? There's obviously like a bunch of energy in store. So I don't think you're shutting down their factories anytime soon.
And we've been talking about this for a few weeks. It is my belief that if you've been following these developments over the past 2.5 weeks, that Trump is building towards a ground operation either to retake the Strait of Hormuz by seizing islands near it or Iran's coastline there, and or Trump is going to invade Karg Island, which is the linchpin, the critical node in Iran's energy sector. And by seizing Karg Island, he can choke off Iran's exports, from which they get 50% of their revenue from their energy exports. And he can then negotiate for the Strait or sue for peace and get other concessions.
There's also talk I've heard that Iran, because their currency, the rial, is literally one of the most worthless currencies on the planet. I think one rial is worth like 1/1,000,000th of a cent or something insane like that. But they want to essentially traffic all of the oil in yuan, the Chinese currency. So they essentially want the yuan to be the petrodollar of the world. And Iran will help them do that, which would be absolutely insane turn of events.
And that seems to be the plan, based on the fact that there is a major reinforcement happening in the Middle East with Marines, paratroopers, and another aircraft carrier, and also based on the fact that he seems to be buying time simultaneously promoting a completely fake peace process and mixing up the signals, telegraphing all sorts of contradictory things. While there is a major reinforcement going on, he's also talking up these peace talks, this diplomatic process that just simply isn't happening. Saying that there will be meetings in Pakistan or in Turkey, that intermediaries are in touch with Iran, that Iran has agreed to all of our terms. In reality, none of this seems to seriously be happening. Now, the big developments from this weekend about the war are that once again, we're getting two completely different messages. So you might recall that the big arc last week in the story is that Trump has created a new ultimatum for Iran. Not last weekend, but the weekend before that, Trump said that Iran had 48 hours to open up the Strait, or else he would attack their power grid. He would attack their power plants, their electrical grid, not necessarily their oil infrastructure, but their electric infrastructure. And naturally, Iran replied and said, well, if Trump escalates it into an energy war, then Iran will respond in kind against Saudi Arabia, against the Emirates, and Kuwait as well. Trump, on Monday last week, pushed that deadline back. He gave Iran 5 more days. Then on Thursday, he pushed the deadline back 10 days. And so
you can go see Trump really doesn't want electricity and desalination in the Gulf bombed because, listen, if desalination gets bombed in Saudi Arabia, they have to empty out their capital city, Riyadh. Like, that's millions of people that have to go somewhere or else they'll literally will die.
Where it sits as of last week is that Iran is currently on a countdown until April 6th, which is next Monday, to open up the Strait, or else Trump has promised to all of their energy. And yet again, there's a question, is Trump actually serious about this deadline or any deadline? Because the 48-hour deadline got extended. The 5-day deadline got extended. Now we're currently in a 10-day deadline. And we all know that if Trump were to Iran's infrastructure, this would be totally unacceptable. By itself, it would also be unacceptable because of Iran's inevitable retaliation. Right now, currently, we are actually letting Iran sell their oil. There is oil that has gone out to sea already, that is on its way to its final destination, and the United States is no longer sanctioning that. So all the oil that left the Strait of Hormuz from Iran prior to the war, we're going to let them sell it. Why? Because we want the maximum supply of oil in the market right now to stabilize prices.
Yeah, isn't that crazy too, that the United States goes to war with Iran on this thing of we're going to take down this crazy regime, and then we get rid of the sanctions on Iran. Meanwhile, literally at the same time, get rid of the sanctions on Russia, fueling Russia's war machine in Ukraine to the tune of billions of dollars. It's insane.
Currently, Iran is still sending oil through the Strait of Hormuz. If our allies send their oil through the Strait, Iran will bomb it. Well, we have the same capability, technically speaking, but we are letting Iran continue to export oil, even though they deny our allies from doing the same, for the same reason. It's the same reason we stopped sanctioning the oil that's at sea. We're continuing to allow them to export oil because we need all the oil in the economy that we can get. So we can't Iran's oil infrastructure. We can't their grid for that reason alone. But even more, if we do that, Iran will Saudi Arabia, they will the Emirates, they will Qatar potentially, they'll Kuwait and Bahrain. And if they do that, then this worsens that effect even more, like I said. So you already have $116 a barrel for oil. If we Iran, that goes up. And when Iran retaliates against the Gulf, it goes up even more. And even still, we might not even open up the Strait of Hormuz after that point. So now we're in a true energy crisis. So if Trump has a deadline and keeps extending it, we don't know that the deadline will ever actually be enforced, if it will ever arrive. Will it get extended in perpetuity? Will Trump call it off? Will he simply decline to enforce it? And we know that he realistically cannot even enforce it. We will get to April 6th, and we'll know then, just as we do now, that Trump really has no ability to follow through on the threat. So why make the threat? Well, yesterday, Trump basically re-upped and renewed the threat. So if there was a question about whether the deadline was still in effect, if that was still going to come due at some point, Trump reminded us that we are still underneath this ultimatum. And Trump put out a tweet. This is according to CNN. It says, quote, President Trump.
It's like so ridiculous at a certain point because it's like, how many deadlines has this guy made? It's just over and over again. Like, he's just a liar. He's just lying every single day.
Trump said if Iran does not reach a deal with the United States and open up the Strait of Hormuz, the country would conclude military involvement in the region by, quote, blowing up and obliterating electric plants and oil wells in Iran. This is from Truth Social. Trump said, quote, the United States of America is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operation in Iran. Great progress has been made, but if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, and if the Strait of Hormuz is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, Karg Island, and possibly all desalinization plants.
It's like so much for actually like wanting to help the Iranian people, right? What happened to the start of the war where you're like, we're doing this to free the Iranian people. We're trying to help them. Yeah, it doesn't really seem like helping them whatsoever.
Which we have purposefully yet not touched. So this is the new threat. And Trump says it's going to be power plants, Karg Island, oil, desalination. It will be all critical civilian infrastructure. We will effectively destroy their economy. That's the new threat. So we're still under the ultimatum as it stands this week. But then, earlier tonight, we get a new report from the Wall Street Journal, which says that actually, Trump is considering ending the war without even opening up the Strait of Hormuz at all. This is from the Journal. It says, quote, President Trump told aides that he is willing to end the military campaign against Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. In recent days, Trump and his aides assessed that a mission to pry open the choke point would push conflict beyond his timeline of 4 to 6 weeks. He decided the U.S. should achieve its main goals of hobbling Iran's navy and missile stocks and wind down current hostilities while pressuring Tehran diplomatically to resume the free flow of trade. There are also military options the president could decide on, but they are not his immediate priority. Trump's desire to end the war quickly is at odds with other moves he's planning to make. This weekend, the USS Tripoli and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit entered the region. Trump also ordered elements of the 82nd Airborne and is considering sending another 10,000 ground troops to the Middle East. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt told reporters the U.S. was working toward normal operations in the Strait, but didn't list it among core military objectives of targeting Iran's navy, missiles, defense industry, and its ability to make a nuclear weapon.
I mean, that sounds like a real soft back down right there, where you just omit it from your military objectives. That seems pretty stark. It seems like you really are going to leave the conflict without actually doing anything about the Strait of Hormuz, which would be effectively giving up sovereignty of that territorial waters, of those territorial waters, to Iran.
The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, speaking to Al Jazeera, said the current campaign to complete U.S. military objectives will be finished within weeks. He said, then we will be confronted with this issue of the Strait of Hormuz, and it will be up to Iran to decide, or a coalition of nations from around the world and the region with the participation of the United States. We will make sure that it's open one way or the other. So this is the story for tonight, simultaneously, Trump is making the threat that if Iran doesn't open the Strait or doesn't make a deal to open the Strait, then we're going to obliterate their entire country. We've already destroyed their navy, military, decapitated the leadership. Trump says we will finish the job by effectively destroying their economy. And this is what Israel wants as well. This is echoed by the Israeli press. This is in the Times of Israel. It says, before the war ends, we're shifting to our final phase. We're halfway done. And we're now going to focus on economic targets, which is oil, which is everything else. And is eager to do this because they sense that maybe a deal is within reach. And this is the messaging that's going out on True Social. This is the messaging that's going out in the Journal, the Post, the Times. This is the messaging on the one hand. They have to open up the Strait, and Trump has insisted on this, by the way, for weeks. They have to open up the Strait. Apparently, this is now the only victory condition because regime change is out and destruction of the missile program is out and securing enriched uranium is out. So on the one hand, the only condition remaining to succeed for a deal, for surrender, is this. Simultaneously, we're also getting all this talk that we're going to leave regardless. And this is coming from White House aides, but it's also coming from the Secretary of State.
I get the sense that Trump is bored. There's been reports that Trump says to people around him that he's bored with the war. This is not the kind of person that I feel like is really general material. He's not a leader like that. You need somebody when something like this is happening. You need somebody that's obsessed. You need somebody that they're thinking only about this war at a certain point and like prosecuting. If that's somebody if that's the person that you really want in charge, if that's what MAGA really wants, but he's scatterbrained. He doesn't really seem to have focus.
Coming from the White House press office, Rubio says, this is with Al Jazeera, which is a Qatari outlet, the Al Thani royal family. Rubio says to them, well, we're going to leave, and then we'll deal with the Strait of Hormuz later. We're going to fight this over the next few weeks until we achieve our military objectives, and then the Straits, well, that's for another day. He seemed to echo the Wall Street Journal report and says we will resolve that diplomatically with every other country at some other time. Now, what are we to make of all this? Because there's so much being said, and they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. On the one hand, you get reporting from the Pentagon that says, we're going to seize Karg Island. We're going to invade the coastline. We're going to invade the islands in the Strait with the help probably of the United Arab Emirates. And they say, Iran has a 10-day deadline and we're going to destroy all their infrastructure. And we're going to everything, and we don't care what the consequences are. We already did it in the Southern Pars gas field, and we already did it on Karg Island. But then simultaneously, you get this messaging that says Iran has already agreed to every point. We're going to meet in Islamabad. We've already made a deal. And they keep going and they say, actually, we don't even care if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. We'll just deal with that later. We've bombed them, and now we're just going to come back on a later day. So what are we to make of all these different conflicting reports? Well, I would say about the Strait of Hormuz, there's something you need to understand about the economic pain that is being applied by Iran. And that is that the sharing of economic pain is not even. It's not even chronologically, and it's not even economically either. The pain that results from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz will be felt first by some countries and later by other countries. And why is that? It has to do with the final destination of the energy products.
Yeah, like some countries right now are in real shock and real crisis mode. I know the Philippines has, within 40 days or so, they're going to completely run out of fuel. Japan has their strategic reserve, but they're also kind of panicking. Japan is looking to pay top dollar to any country that has oil whatsoever. It's looking pretty bad for all of Asia. I mean, 90% of Iran's oil goes to China directly. So China is definitely hurting from this, which is just, if China's hurting, that's not good for the global economy, obviously, overall.
The oil and natural gas that comes from the Persian Gulf mostly goes to Asia. The oil from Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, all of that oil, for the most part, is exported to India, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Malaysia, the Philippines. This is where the oil actually goes first. So if that oil is not going out from the Strait, there's a couple of things that are happening. And the first thing that is happening is that these countries are not going to get their shipment of oil. That is what happens first. The actual oil in the barrels that's pumped out of Iran and Saudi Arabia, it just stops showing up to India. And that actually hasn't started happening yet because there's a timed delay. The oil that left the Strait before the war is still out at sea and is still arriving in ports. They're still getting it. They're still getting their jet fuel and diesel and gas, their petrol. They're still getting all those products. They're still getting it, and they're still able to have energy. But it's on a timed delay. And once all those shipments are completed, there's going to be a gap in the oil import from the Persian Gulf.
And it's like such a knock-on effect of so many different things, like fertilizer, huge amounts of fertilizer that come from the Gulf, insane amounts of nitrogen, all sorts of different stuff that you need for major industrial things that human beings rely on in mass. You need these for agriculture.
This is why the prices are going up, and that's a secondary effect. Because, of course, what are these countries going to do? Well, they still need energy. They still need fossil fuels, so they're just going to buy it from somewhere else. They'll buy it from another supplier. And this is why the prices go up, because the supply is constrained while demand remains the same. So if there is the same demand, but there's a smaller supply, then the price goes up. And that's why it affects us. But we still are getting oil. We still are getting oil from Canada, and we're still getting oil from other sources. And so we're only hit by the price shock. We're actually not affected necessarily in the same way by the supply crunch. And so when Trump says, we'll leave the Strait of Hormuz closed, first and foremost, that's a problem for Asia because they're not going to get their oil. And if they want it, they're going to have to pay Iran $2 million a pop, which they don't want to do. It's prohibitively expensive. Secondly, it's going to hit Europe because Europe is dependent on Qatar and the United States for liquefied natural gas. Europe got a lot of their energy from Russia before the Ukraine war started. It was pumped in from Cold War era, Soviet era pipelines through Ukraine and then through the Nordic Sea. And that is where they were getting their energy mix. It was a lot of natural gas from Russia. Obviously, the United States blew up that pipeline. And to replace the natural gas they were getting from Russia, which is not easily replaced, they started to get natural gas from the United States and from Qatar. Qatar supplies 20% all by itself of the world's liquefied natural gas. You stop that from coming out, and the price of natural gas for Europe goes through the roof. This is a big problem for them. Again, it's a problem for Asia first, it's a problem for Europe second, and only at the very end of the process is it a problem for the United States, and only because of the price shock, only because energy becomes more expensive. But we're not necessarily going to run out of energy. It is.
Yeah, and it's also like you're the richest country in the world too. So prices going up, well, yeah, it's bad and it's not good. It's obviously not good for economic growth, obviously, and it hurts the poorest, among us. But if we're living in reality here, if you're in the richest country in the world, then a price shock is really not that bad compared to having literally no energy whatsoever.
Europe that will have to ration its energy resources. It is Asia which will have to ration their energy resources. It will be bad globally for the whole economy, but this is like everything else. If you understand Trump's MO, this is a game of chicken. It's no different than Trump bombing Iran's energy. He is daring Iran to retaliate against the Persian Gulf or the Gulf Cooperation Council nations, because he's effectively saying, you should really see if we need the Persian Gulf oil as badly as you need it. He's trying to call their bluff. Go ahead, Saudi Arabia, we don't care. You need your oil more than we need their oil. Now, that may or may not be true. It would be detrimental. But Trump is trying to convince Iran that if we make a decisive strike on their energy infrastructure, in the long run, they're going to miss it more. Yes, it will be bad for us, but our regime will survive. Can Iran survive without its military, without the Ayatollah, and without their energy infrastructure? Surely they will impose a severe cost, but maybe not as high as the cost we impose on them in the long run.
You have to keep in mind, it's the resource that this current regime in Iran is running on. Absolutely. It's the cash flow. It's the only way. How do you think they're able to still buy parts and stuff to build more missiles, to build more drones, to keep things running? It's with this oil money. It's their only source of income. In Iran, they've kind of trapped themselves by not having any diversity to their economy whatsoever. But, how can you blame them when they've been sanctioned so heavily?
And in exactly the same way, Trump is now doing the same to our allies in Asia and Europe. Because recall, 2 weeks ago, Trump pled with Europe and with the G4 countries and the other allies in the Pacific and begged them to assist the United States in opening up the Strait, begged them to provide their naval resources, begged them to send their troops to die in this war. And every single country refused. Australia, South Korea, Japan, Italy, Germany, Poland, every country refused to help. And then Trump said, well, fine, you know what? Fine, we'll solve it. We don't even need you guys. Now, a week and a half later, the messaging is, well, maybe we'll leave the war and we'll let all of our so-called allies, they can figure it out because they need it more than we do. So what's the purpose of that messaging? In this case, that messaging isn't for us, and certainly that messaging is not for Iran. It's mixed messaging for different audiences. The message for Iran is you have a deadline. If you don't do what we say, we might wipe you off the map, and you should be confident that we're serious. We know what you're capable of, and we know that you will retaliate against the Gulf, but see if we care. If we destroy your energy infrastructure, then you're not going to have a regime in 6 months. It'll just be easier for us to come back. That's what Trump is communicating to Iran with the ultimatum yesterday. But what he is communicating to Asia and Europe is you better help us. You better hope that we succeed, because if we don't, and if you don't help us, we're going to leave without solving this problem that we happen to create, but you're going to be left picking up the pieces.
Yeah, it's such a terrible move towards our allies, man. I think words can't overstate how much our Asian and European allies look at this situation with utter disdain. I mean, you have to look at this and go, we literally created this whole problem, or Trump did, I should say, and now we're telling our allies to fix it, and we're just going to walk away from it. I mean, just complete, the worst ally kind of behavior ever. Are you barely an ally?
And Trump is trying to convince these other countries in the same way that he's trying to convince Iran, you need the Strait of Hormuz open more than we do. Okay, fine. You don't want to help? Then we'll leave. You need that energy far more than we do because you actually import it. It'll get more expensive for us. We'll absorb the energy shock. We have reserves. We have other suppliers. It's you that's going to be out of luck first. So try and figure that one out. And there's something pathetic and desperate about this because you realize this is a person that has no credibility. Does he think this is going to work? Does anybody? No, this is the strategy. I'm not saying I think this is a good idea. I'm not saying I endorse this. I'm saying this is the intentionality behind it. I saw a clip the other week. I was explaining Trump's planning on Carg Island, and people said, Fuentes is flip-flopping. Now he supports it. I'm simply laying out the thought process. I'm laying out what the planners are thinking in the same way here. So is this going to work? Well, does Iran really believe that the United States is willing to let the Gulf countries be destroyed? Because that's surely what would happen. We go in and we Carg Island, as we promised to do, and desalination, and we their electrical grid. Well, like I said, first and foremost, that is going to cause oil to go even higher.
Yeah, and you want to cause a supreme disaster in the Gulf states. It's like your economy already there. They were trying to transition to tourism. Now that's gone completely. No one's ever going back there for tourism. Oil and natural gas, that is done. And then everyone's going to be dehydrated as hell. You're not going to have any water in the country very soon. This is just going to be the destruction of the Gulf states,
which Trump has done everything in his power to prevent by lying to the press, lying to the markets, changing his operation, changing the playbook depending upon when the markets open and close, opening up the strategic reserves. 261 million barrels of oil were released. So does Trump's threat track with how he's approached that problem? Absolutely not. When he bombed Iran's energy, Trump disavowed. When it went and bombed the Southern Pars gas field, Trump said they made a mistake and they'll never do it again. So do the Iranians really believe? Does Trump believe they believe that Trump is going to go in everything at all? But then even more, and then allow Iran to rain missiles on Dubai, Doha, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, destroy Saudi Aramco, destroy Qatari's LNG, destroy desalination. Of course that is unacceptable for the United States. Of course he's not going to follow through. Obviously, that would be detrimental.
I mean, what's the rule around here, guys? It's taco. Trump always chickens out. I swear, that's the best thing you can bet on. All these people on Polymarket, everything. Trump just chickening out. It's the best bet you could ever make in your life.
So that's not a serious threat. That's a bluff. Trump is bluffing. And the Iranians know that. And on some level, he has to know that they know it's a bluff because it's simply unacceptable. Like I said, if we were willing to sacrifice Iran's energy, why would we release the sanctions on the Iranian energy that's already out to sea? Why would we let Iran continue to transit oil through the Strait of Hormuz? We wouldn't. Why would we be reassuring the markets every weekend? Why would we carefully avoid bombing the oil on Carg Island? Why would we reprimand it for bombing the gas field? We wouldn't. And moreover, as far as Japan and India and South Korea and Europe are concerned, once again, it's a bluff. When Trump says we're going to walk away without opening up the Strait, it's a possibility we might do that or might be forced to do that. But does he really believe that these other countries believe that we're going to give up? And how does that make any sense? We're going to go to war with Iran and then we're going to let them take control of the Strait. And they went from controlling 4% of the global energy supply to 20% because now they're charging a toll in the Strait of Hormuz. They actually expanded their territory in our war of aggression. Does Trump think that these other countries think we're going to do that? And by the way, that is going to destroy our economy too. And we might be more acutely affected than other countries because it is our economy which is totally reliant on artificial intelligence, which is totally dependent on cheap and abundant energy. We actually need more energy than we have, and we have less energy than we started out with. So what happens when oil gets to $200 a barrel? Well, all of a sudden, all that compute that we have running in all these data centers, which is driving commercial real estate, which is driving the S&P 500, which is driving NVIDIA and its valuation, all of that is going to collapse. And what happens when that real estate stops being built? And what happens when those chips stop being purchased? And what happens when all of a sudden OpenAI and Gemini and all these other companies that borrowed so much money, what happens when they are no longer profitable or there's no expectation of profitability?
Oh, man. You guys might have heard of Microsoft Copilot. If you've been following what's going on with Windows 11 and Copilot, it's crazy, man. Microsoft stock, I believe it's gone down around 50% since the beginning of the year, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, guys, but it's due to them investing $500 billion more into Copilot, their failed AI. This is something that these massive corporations are doing. They're just burning money. They're burning billions, sometimes trillions of dollars on terrible AI models that can't even do anything.
Well, we're going to have problems too. Just because we're not getting the oil from Saudi Arabia doesn't mean this is going to be a walk in the park for us either. And so it comes down to credibility. The Trump playbook is the maximalist demand, the ultimatum, the deadline. We have all the cards. You don't have the cards. We're going to dictate the terms. We're the United States every single time. And then Trump always chickens out. And you see it every single time. It happened with Greenland. We have to have Greenland. We're going to take it. And then NATO put troops there, made some threats, and he totally backed down. We got nothing. And Trump did it with China in the trade war. On Liberation Day, when Trump announced the tariffs, he said, if China puts retaliatory tariffs on our goods, then we're going to raise the tariff to 100%. And China did. And then we raised it to 200%, and China reciprocated. And then Washington was begging Beijing to come to the table and make a deal, begging them, while they were telling the media that China was asking us for relief, which they weren't. He did it with Russia. He told Putin, you have 30 days, you have 2 weeks, you have 10 days. And then when Putin didn't meet the deadline, Trump said, never mind, well, we're having productive talks and we're just going to cut him some slack. We're just going to give him a break anyway. Literally every single time with Russia, with China, with Greenland, with all of these countries, this is a person with no credibility. This is what eroding deterrence really looks like. And fundamentally, it's about overexpansion.
That's why what you saw in the Oval Office between Trump, J.D. Vance, and Zelensky, where they had that big argument, that, kerfuffle or whatever, it's almost like a Rorschach test for politics, what you see there, where if you see a strong Trump in that moment, you're lulled. You're still under his scent. You're still just smelling it and thinking, oh, this is great. This is all roses. But if you're looking at that, you're with reality goggles on, you go, it seems like you kind of failed your negotiations with Vladimir Putin, right? It seems like you're unloading on Zelensky now that you're frustrated.
The United States is still unquestionably a first-tier great power. China is not on our level. Russia is not on our level. But we are no longer a hyperpower. We are no longer a global hegemon. We cannot pressure Russia to do what we want them to do. We can't pressure China. And increasingly, we can't even pressure these middle powers effectively. North Korea, Iran, we've really done as much as we can do to them. Maximum pressure sanctions, but if they have a nuclear arsenal, a strategic weapon in the case of North Korea, or if they have a conventional arsenal of strategic weapons like Iran, there is little in the way of military action that we can even do. So this is overestimating our capability. This is overextension. We're writing checks that we can't cash. It doesn't mean that we're not a powerful nation. It doesn't mean we don't have leverage. It doesn't mean that that leverage is not powerful to persuade or leverage other countries to do what we want them to do. But what we're seeing in Ukraine and Iran is the true limits of U.S. force projection. We can't retake Crimea and the Donbass. We can't prevent Iran from closing the Strait of Hormuz. We can't achieve regime change. We just simply can't. And so promising to do all these things and then not being able to do them, every time that happens, it erodes deterrence. It erodes U.S. credibility. And increasingly, people are starting to look at America as a paper tiger.
Yeah, and this is exactly why I bring up the Zelensky Oval Office meeting, where if you see that and go, wow, Trump, that was base Trump, and you don't see that it's the United States giving up on an ally, all right, giving up on you basically told somebody we got your back, and then you're backing off. It's a bad signal to send overall. Globally, this is just damaging.
That cannot really and truly follow through on its threats. That is not that superpower that took down Saddam Hussein with shock and that was able to push other countries around like it did in the 10 years after the Cold War. And this is being undone, ironically, by Trump. It was the Democrats that had a doctrine of smart power, using our power in a restrained way, in a tactical way for limited objectives, using it to achieve diplomacy when possible. It is under the Trump doctrine, overestimating and overextending our capabilities, that now people are starting to see the true limits. And we're able to get away with a lot less. So the question is, does anybody really believe this? When Trump says, we're going to destroy all your stuff, we're going to let them keep the Strait of Hormuz, the answer is clearly no. I don't think anybody believes this. And what it shows is that Trump is truly stuck in this conflict. You think about if plan A was we pound Iran as hard as we can and we hope that they topple, or if they don't, that they don't close the Strait of Hormuz, well, then what exactly was plan B? What was the alternative? Because it seems like the alternative is now we're going to try to rush a small force to the Persian Gulf. We're going to bluff and we're going to make up a bunch of stuff. We're going to start sounding crazy and make all these demands again that everybody knows we have no ability to follow through on. And then in the end, we're going to try an extremely risky operation to try to salvage this. We're going to escalate it, put more Americans in harm's way. We're going to risk a real strategic humiliation, a real tactical defeat in order to resign without looking like a complete embarrassment. It seems like that's the plan B. And it's like we discussed last week, while all of this is going on, the Marines, the first group, has arrived in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, it's like at a certain point, when you look at the calculation, you're like, well, yeah, losing face on the world stage would be bad, but is it as bad as being in a total war, ground war in Iran? I mean, man, just Google what the landscape looks like there. It is completely just barren. It's a barren wasteland of mountains and desert. Don't get me wrong, there's some nice parts of Iran, all right? But the parts that you're going to be going through and fighting as part of the Zog army, it's not going to be pretty. Let me tell you that. You're going to be dying in some pretty desolate places.
And the paratroopers are arriving in the Persian Gulf this week, and another aircraft carrier is arriving. In the meantime, Trump is saying simultaneously, while he's making threats, threatening to walk away without opening the strait, he is telling the media that we have made a deal with Iran. And this is how you know that what is coming is a military operation. Because he is simply saying things that are not true. He is telling the press that Iran has accepted the 15-point plan, which they have outright rejected, and they've actually rejected negotiating altogether because of the plan. They've said unless the United States walks back some of these ridiculous demands, well, we can't even sit with you. We won't even talk to you. And Trump is not only saying that negotiations are underway, he's saying that they're pleading for negotiations and that they've already agreed.
It doesn't make any sense. Plus, with the fact that you've multiple times just snaked them out, you've lied, you've put up negotiations as a ruse to get their guard down. You've done that multiple times, like over and over again in different contexts and circumstances. No one domestically or internationally believes you, like, at all.
So that's not true. At the same time, he's extending his own deadline over and over. Well, if he was really looking for an exit, if he was really bored with the fighting, interested in other priorities, if he was really going to walk away without opening the Strait, why wouldn't he have walked away yesterday? If the deadline was on Friday, why would he not have walked away this weekend? Why wait for another week of economic pain? Why wait another week of an energy crunch? Why would he wait another week if there's no peace process underway? If Iran is not becoming more compliant because they're not really under pressure, why not just cut our losses now? It doesn't make sense, because this is what is being telegraphed and signaled by the White House. They say Trump is bored. He wants to move on to Cuba. He wants to do something else. They're saying he wants the war only to go on for 5 weeks and not any longer. He's ready to move on after the Strait of Hormuz. He's frustrated. He realizes that we're not going to topple the regime. Really? So why did the deadline get extended? Why did we not call the quits and we're just going to suffer another week? Why? There is no peace process. We're not talking to the Iranians. All that it would profit us to extend the war one more week arbitrarily is it's going to make oil cost more. And it's going to cost everything cost more in the long run. So if something doesn't add up, it means that something else is happening behind the scenes. And I think it's very clear that the peace talks are a sham. And to the extent that you're reading about these things in the media, this is meant to reassure the markets. And it's also meant to signal to the other allies that maybe they should help. I think that's been the strategy for the past week and a half. Even to the extent that Trump says we're going to ban their oil, that would have the same effect as letting the Strait of Hormuz remain closed. If Trump says he's going to ban Iran's energy sector, that ultimately has a worse effect than leaving the Strait of Hormuz in the hands of Tehran, at least for Asia, and then secondarily for Europe. So that's just as much of a threat against Tehran as it is for all those other countries. And that type of messaging has simply not stopped since those countries refused to assist. Trump recognized he got trapped, called for help from his allies. Embarrassingly, they rejected him. And ever since then, Trump has been threatening Iran, but also all of them. We're going to hurt your long-term energy prices and supply by bombing Iran, letting them bomb the Gulf, and leaving the Strait of Hormuz in their control.
It's just like the worst kind of messaging. It's the worst kind of threats that you can be making to your own allies. This is essentially you're extorting Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, France, UK, Germany, Poland. I mean, literally like Spain, Portugal. I mean, treating Spain like garbage over this whole thing has just been a ridiculous sideshow too.
In the meantime, he's been hedging now. Or rather, I should say, everything has now become about opening up the Strait, open it up or else, only for him today and his State Department and White House to start telegraphing, actually, we don't need the Strait. Well, if we don't need the Strait, then why are we waiting on them to make a deal to open it? And if we're willing to bomb Iran's energy, then why haven't we done it yet? And if we could open up the Strait without our allies, then why do we still keep begging them for help? Well, the answer is it's all a farce. This is all classic Trump. He is bluffing against Iran. He's bluffing against the Gulf. He's bluffing against Asia, and he's bluffing against Europe. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, they all want Iran to get hit more before we leave. Trump is telling them, well, if you want to hit Iran more, then why don't you help? And these Asian and European countries, they want to make a deal. Trump is telling them, if you want the Strait open so badly, then you need to help. And he's telling Iran, if you don't want us to actually visit destruction upon your country, then you should just cut us a deal. But he's creating options for himself.
It's like, you got to understand too, when you're asking a country like Japan to send their military to help you reopen the straits, like, legally they can't. It's unconstitutional. It's like America wrote their constitution, and it says it can only be used in defense of the Japanese mainland. So we have like conflicts like that going on.
And if none of these come through, or to whatever extent help is contributed, Trump is preparing for a ground incursion in Iran. And that seems to be the ultimate play. How are we going to exit without giving Iran the Strait, exit without losing our deterrence and our credibility and legitimacy? It is by winning a decisive battle against Iran, taking hostage something they can't live without, and that's Karg Island, or it's an attempt to reopen the Strait through military force. And I continue to believe that until that happens, it's about as transparent as it can get, which is that they're buying time, leveraging allies as they prepare all the way to retake those islands unilaterally with this Marine force, reinforce it with the paratroopers, and then ground forces from the rest of the infantry. I think that's the play. And if it wasn't, you would see Trump act in other ways. There would be other actions. You would expect other messaging from the White House. So I still think that's the way it's headed. And I have to say, it's not going to go the way you think. This is a terrible idea. And earlier I alluded to this, and this is the last thing I'll say about this operation. This is a trap by Iran, but it's nested inside of a trap which is laid by it.
Yeah, you want to invade any part of Iran, you are going to get absolutely devastated by drones and missiles. Not only that, but there's going to be such a killer insurgency there. A country of 93 million people, heavily armed. There's guns all over the country, heavy weapons all over the country. You think that you're not going to encounter insane, especially if you're launching attacks on the civilian infrastructure, that's just going to radicalize more and more people and convince more and more Iranians that you're waging this war on the Iranian people.
It's a trap from both countries. Now, you have to go back to the strategic objectives of all the parties involved. Iran wants survival, wants regime change. They are in a fundamental tension. Wants Iran to be destroyed? Well, Iran wants not to be destroyed. So Iran has developed strategic weapons. Their nuclear hedge, their missile arsenal, their drone and missile industry, as well as the proxy network. Well, these capabilities have now brought the United States into the equation because these capabilities threaten necessarily. And that doesn't mean that Iran will use them offensively or aggressively, but it does mean every weapon has a deterrent as well as an offensive capability. You can't distinguish between the two. The United States has nuclear missiles. You could just as easily say those exist to deter Russia as you can say they exist to destroy Russia, because ultimately deterrence is the threat of destruction. So because Iran has this stockpile of strategic weapons, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, nuclear enrichment, as well as the proxies, it necessarily threatens the regional order because it puts the Gulf countries in those concentric circles of the range of those weapons, as well as and U.S. bases. So this is where we are brought into the equation. Now, fundamentally, we are brought into this equation because of it seeks Iran's destruction. So Iran has to invest all of its resources in these deterrent weapons. And that is what draws in the United States.
Yeah, and it's a simple calculation for Iran where they can't have an air force because jets will get shot down too easily. So you build a bunch of missiles and drones. You can't really have a navy because, as we saw, it just gets destroyed immediately. So you have a bunch of underwater drones. It just makes sense, right?
To counter those weapons, either by destroying them or through diplomacy. And this has been the triangulation from the beginning. Now, is seeking Iran's destruction, but those weapons stand in the way. And those weapons do a very good job at deterring, because it can never regime change Iran by itself. Why? Well, we're seeing why. Because Iran is a huge country with 90 million people, 4 times the size of Iraq, mountains and desert. They've got a middle class, a big economy, oil rich. They've got allies in Russia and China. a nation of 9 million people, could never step to Iran. And they especially can never step to Iran when Iran has them encircled by Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Shiite militias in other countries, and especially not when Iran has 3,000 missiles. That if it were a war only between Tel Aviv and Tehran, Iran would wipe out with that missile arsenal. So it has to bring in the United States to destroy those weapons, to render Iran defenseless, so that the U.S. and Israel can topple Iran. But here's the rub. The United States does not necessarily want to topple Iran. Again, the only interest for the United States is we cannot tolerate the existence of those weapons. As long as those missiles exist, we have to assume they're pointed at Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and...
Yeah, and you have to think, like, the logistics of trying to get every single missile out of Iran, every single ballistic missile. I mean, these are very simple things. You can 3D print the casing or whatever you want to call it, the body of the rocket. These things are not very difficult to make whatsoever. You're never going to be able to shut down Iran's ability to launch a couple of ballistic missiles every now and again, which that's all they need to do. It's a couple of drones, couple of missiles, and you can shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It takes a very small number, actually.
As long as that enrichment exists, we have to assume they are pursuing a weapon of mass destruction, and this affects us. So we are brought in to destroy the weapons, but we're not married to the idea of toppling the government. So their trap is to draw us in to a existential total war with Iran with the weapons as the bait. And this is what they've done. So, for example, last year, when we bombed Iran the first time, what was the pretext? We bombed Iran in Midnight Hammer because it provoked a war with Iran and couldn't finish their attack on Iran's nuclear complex. Where they're enriching the uranium, it's too far underground for Israel to reach. They don't have the ordnance to destroy it. And so you could say that it started the job, and initiating that hostility meant that Iran would accelerate their race towards a nuclear bomb. If it bombs their nuclear facilities, well, what's Iran going to do? They're going to speed run to a nuclear bomb to actualize their deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, it's all Iran can really do at this point. You'd have to imagine that what nuclear centrifuges they do have, they're running at full capacity, that they've salvaged all of that uranium that was under Natanz or Isfahan, that they have secured their scientists and that their scientists are safe and that they're working on it. You have to assume all of this.
But because it couldn't finish the job, it forced the United States to intervene. By starting something it couldn't finish, by hitting those weapons, which are use them or lose them, Iran recognized in that moment they would either break out and become a nuclear power, or they would lose deterrence and they would get bombed all the time by the United States. And it could not prevent them from breaking out after that point. They triggered a countdown timer, and that meant the United States had to jump in. Can't finish the job, but they initiated the countdown to an Iranian bomb. It made it urgent. And so they drew us in with the nuclear program. We didn't necessarily go in to topple Iran's regime. We went in to prevent a nuclear breakout. So we dropped a couple of bombs in Midnight Hammer, and we weren't happy about it. Trump came out and said, I don't know what the they're doing. I can't believe it. Fine, we bombed them once. Are you happy? But of course, what did that do? It started a different timer.
Yeah, by the time that you Iran like that, and you've already faked negotiations with Iran multiple times, they have to be working towards a nuclear weapon, and you can't blame them because you've just lied. You've been in bad faith the entire time with them. They think that you're just a betrayer, like you have not a trustworthy bone in your body, essentially.
Because once we bombed Iran the first time, Iran expelled all the IAEA inspectors. They refused to negotiate any further, and they redoubled their efforts to build missiles. If they couldn't access the uranium, then they would build 300 to 500 missiles per month. And so they expanded their missile arsenal, replenished it, and maybe increased it since the war. So then Netanyahu came to Washington and said, now Iran has missiles. They're going to use missiles against us. And if we don't act, they're going to use them against us in the United States. Famously, Rubio said days after the war started, was planning yet another preemptive attack, and if they attacked their missiles, they couldn't finish the job, and those missiles would be used against U.S. positions or the Gulf. So that's why we had to go in. Okay, so here we go again to Iran's missiles. Again, it's their weapons. We were drawn in first to the nukes, but it sealed our fate. Then we were brought in to their missiles, just the missiles, and it sealed our fate. Now we're stuck. Why? Because now that we've gone whole hog, like we talked about earlier, this was a killing blow. This was attempted murder. We tried to kill everyone in Iran's regime and decapitate their government. So now they have to make it as miserable as possible so that we don't do it again.
Yeah, it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to stop every Shahed drone that comes across? Like, it's just completely unrealistic. Are you going to stick around? Or you're going to every truck that could shoot a missile? So you're going to scour every truck in all of Iran and just every truck in Iran that could possibly carry a missile or a drone. It's just a ridiculous effort
to deter us in the future. That's what deterrence is. It deters future aggression. We say we tried and failed. It didn't work. And next time we think about trying something like that again, we'll remember how badly it went, how economically it devastated us. So maybe we'll think twice about another, decapitation, decisive strike on Iran. That's what Iran has to do. So now we're stuck. But we're truly stuck because, like we talked about before, if we leave this conflict, we can only do so on Iran's terms. That means it's a strategic victory for them. That means they are emboldened, their regime is fortified, their people have rallied around it, and the regime is only just going to get to work preparing for the next war. So we've only just reset the existing timer. They're going to build more missiles, they're going to try to recover the uranium, and we can't just restart the hostilities because it'll be deja vu all over again. So we'll have to watch them do it all over again until once again, it's too late. So there's really no exit ramp. But this was by design. It wanted us stuck so that the only way out is to devastate their regime. And so is actually whispering in Trump's ear, and they're telling Trump, you have to invade Karg Island. You have to take the islands in the Strait of Hormuz. And the Gulf countries are telling Trump, you have to finish the job. You have to destroy Iran. Now, why are they telling Trump to do this? Because they know that if we invade the islands, a lot of Americans are going to die. And we may or may not be successful. And if we're not successful, well, now we're really stuck.
Yeah, if that operation is a failure, which there's not a zero chance that it ends in failure, just considering how easy it would be for Shahed drones and ballistic missiles to rain down on Americans. It's an 8-mile long island. Like, this is such a small target. It seems like a kind of a ridiculous operation. All in all, what are you going to do? Fly from Kuwait hundreds of miles across the Persian Gulf in helicopters? You're going to do paratrooper drops, that kind of stuff. They're going to be sitting ducks. I mean, this, not to mention the fact that you have thousands of people on the island. You have an urban, like, town part of it, like a city, and a refinery, that the fighting in there is just going to be absolutely chaotic if there's an insurgency.
We're stuck now because they're making gas a little bit too expensive. What happens when we try to invade an island and they kill 100 Americans or 1,000 Americans, God forbid? And what if we don't even take the island? You thought it would be humiliating to leave now? You thought we lost our deterrent credibility before? Wait until that happens. What do you think the options are after this operation fails? And surely, what else could be the outcome? If Iran can continue to hit the Persian Gulf and the Gulf Cooperation Council, if they can one of our AWACS in Saudi Arabia with precision, what makes it think they can't hit their own island? What makes it think they can't hit the islands in the Strait? Of course they could do it. And how are Marines going to survive? We won't even send our carriers into the Persian Gulf. We won't send our destroyers into the Persian Gulf. The U.S. Navy is 3,000 kilometers away from the Persian Gulf because we know we're going to get hit if we even get close. So how's a Marine going to land on Karg Island and they're going to be okay? They're not. And knows that. And that's why they're drawing us in step by step. First it was the nukes. Then it was the missiles. Now it's the Strait. Then it'll be avenging those Americans that were killed. And Iran still is capable of escalating. What happens after we fail to take the island? And maybe we just unleash more air power on Iran. What happens then when the Iraqi militias join the fight? Has anyone even thought of that? You know, Iraq is a majority Shiite nation. So is Bahrain. So what happens? And so is, by the way, Saudi Arabia's eastern province where all the oil is. So what happens when the Houthis close the Red Sea? What happens when the Houthis Saudi Arabia? What happens when the Shiites in Saudi's eastern province and Bahrain and Iraq, what happens when they get restive? What happens when they storm the consulate or embassy in Baghdad and fucking kill everybody? What happens when an all-out war breaks out between the U.S. position in Erbil and the Shiite militias headquartered in Baghdad or elsewhere in Iraq?
And we're already starting to see attacks on the U.S. Embassy there, Shahid drones hitting the U.S. Embassy. There's been reported casualties there. A French soldier was killed in Erbil. Erbil is massive military presence there. Coalition forces still in the north. There are a lot of Kurds, of course, is mainly controlled by Kurds. That whole area has been ramping up subtly, but that's where you're going to see really like the first ground combat really between American forces on the ground and Iranian-backed forces is really going to be in northern Iraq.
What happens then? Well, I don't think anyone's even thinking of that. And so you think this is going to be a 2-week war, 4-week war, 2 more months to stop the spread, whatever. People are saying there's peace talks. Trump is going to leave without opening the Strait. None of that makes sense. All of this is pointing towards regime change one way or another. Either Trump is going to bite the bullet and we're going to try to retreat with honor, in which case we'll be back. We'll be back. Is going to unload on them in the final however many hours of the conflict, and they're going to cripple Iran's economy. Iran's command and control is already defective, and they're just going to sit back while Mossad goes to work, and they're going to wait for the civil war in 6 to 9 months. Or Trump is going to escalate, try to invade one of the islands on the ground. If it goes well, if it doesn't go well, casualties are going to be high. It's only going to draw us further in. And that's the whole point of it. And it just seems like now there's no way to go. There's no way out of this other than through this. People are saying, call your congressman, call your senator, and say what? What are you going to tell them that's going to be more persuasive than AIPAC's money? Remember when everybody said AIPAC isn't a big deal, the digital lobby's more powerful? Go ahead. Call your Republican congressman. Call your Republican congressman, your Republican senator. Remember Thomas Massey said every Republican in Congress has an AIPAC guy? Go ahead. Call him. Call him, stupid goy. Light up the phone lines. Say, hey, we should not Iran or whatever.
Even then, it's like, do you think that like Congress can really reel in what's going on at this point? Like, sure, Congress can have a vote and try to do something about it, but if they're all in the pocket of the same thing, no, they're not going to be able to do anything about it because they're all in on it.
Go fucking tell somebody who cares. You'd be better off telling Grok. Hey, Grok, we shouldn't go to war. You better tell Grok at this point. You'd be better off. Maybe that'd be a more productive use of your time. They say, light up the switchboards, call Congress. Too late. Too late. We're stuck. There's no off-ramp. They're not going to open up the Strait. We're not going to be able to liberate it. I don't even see how that's possible. And as you know, is still hell-bent on getting the regime change they want, and they're going to get it one way or the other. So that's why I say pray for Iran, pray for the designs of the Jews to fail. That's all we could do. Iran is fighting for the whole world right now. And don't get me wrong, I'm not praying for more casualties. I want that to stop. I want the United States to be finished. But Iran right now is fighting for all of humanity. They really are. In a way, they're fighting for us. Because if Iran falls, it means it controls the entire Middle East. And the power that Iran exercises over the Strait, over the Red Sea, that's what it wants. That's what Israel's playing for. They want that power over our government. They want that power over the Gulf. They want that power over all the trade, all the commerce, all the supply chains, everything that goes through the Middle East. They want all of it. And never forget, they are a nuclear-armed intelligence superpower with a fifth column in the United States, Europe, Russia. Increasingly, they're spreading their tentacles even into Asia.
Yeah, it's the weird thing that was doing a move into India right now, and there's a whole lot of Indians that are buying into this slop, this garbage, where, Modi is, of course, playing into all this, where they're essentially creating a great friendship with India, and that's just satanic match made in heaven.
If Iran can't shut them down, nobody can. Trump can't or won't. The United States can't. Russia can't. Europe can't. It is literally Iran, a country that has turned itself into a fortress for this eventuality. They're fighting for all of us. Iran is fighting for all the Goyim. Make no mistake about it. If we, the United States, were challenging the way Iran is, they would be murdering us too. They'd be bombing our schools. They'd be assassinating our leaders. They'd be killing our soldiers. They'd be doing the same thing. Everyone that stands in their way, they give the Gaza treatment. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Iran. It's not Iran they're after. Is after you. Iran is just in the way. Never forget that. Was not after Iran and the Ayatollah. Was after you. It's just Iran that is in the way. So say some prayers for the Islamic Republic of Iran. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on one thing. The Zionist occupation regime has to be stopped.
Yeah, I'm sure I would agree with some Shia when it comes to women and stuff like that. Hey, shout out to my Shia.
And that's enough for me. They're fighting for all the marbles out there. Anyway, that's that. We're going to move on.
All right, guys, like, subscribe. Tell me what you think down below. I'm out for tonight. Peace.